Dr. Robert George is a professor at Princeton University and the founder of the American Principles Project. Dr. George, you've taught a class with your friend and colleague Cornel West at Princeton. He's known for being more on the leftist side in terms of politics, but you make it a point that people can interact, have good relationship, and work on their political differences together. How do you get that message across, though, to politicians in Washington where things are so divisive?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, but it's a challenge that we're going to have to meet. Things could spin out of control very quickly and very badly here in the United States. We are much too polarized. The language is much too vitriolic, and people are already resorting to violence. We've seen it on our college campuses. We've seen it at Middlebury. We've seen it at Berkeley. This could become worse than a cold civil war. This could end up in a situation in which people are doing what Mr. Hodgkinson tried to do to Republican members of Congress a couple of days ago. Right. Shooting, murder. So we're just going to have to get there. In my 32 years of teaching at Princeton, Wyatt, nothing has been more enjoyable or I think important than the teaching I've done with Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West and I, as you say, are at opposite sides in the, of the political spectrum, and yet we both believe deeply in the inherent dignity of the human person, and that means we treat each other with respect despite our differences, that we listen to each other, that we recognize that neither of us is infallible. Both of us are capable of being wrong about something or anything, so we need to engage each other in a spirit of civility and openness. We need to be willing to learn from each other. Now, I'm a Republican, but I don't imagine that the Republicans are right on everything and the Democrats are wrong on everything. I think Democrats are wrong on some pretty important things: pro-life, marriage, religious liberty. But there's no guarantee from God that the Republicans are always going to be right and the Democrats are always going to be wrong. And I would hope that folks on the Democratic side would adopt exactly the same attitude. Now, Mrs. Pelosi's rhetoric here is not helping. But I hope that people will adopt the same attitude, recognizing that they too have something to learn from people on the Republican or the conservative side. They need to be open, they need to listen, they need to engage, as Professor West does. Now, Professor West has set a model for people on the left. I hope I've set something of a model for people on the conservative side.
Well, Dr. George, here really quickly, just give me your assessment of what you think about young people right now. Do they tend to be as hyper-polarized, or do they tend to be more open to this kind of dialogue?
I'm afraid things have gone in the wrong direction, and it's not their fault. Well, it's partially their fault. We have to hold to individual responsibility. But they've received a lot of bad lessons from older people. I mean, look at what Mrs. Pelosi was saying there. That sets a bad example for young people. And there are people on the conservative side who have also set a bad example with vitriolic rhetoric and denouncing other people and personal attacks and so forth. So we see on our campuses today so often, from Middlebury to Claremont to Yale to University of Missouri to Berkeley, students who are unwilling to listen to people who disagree with them. They denounce them as bigots and haters. They stigmatize and marginalize them. They shout them down. They seek to get them disinvited if they're invited to speak on campus. That's no good. That's a very bad attitude. It's deeply contrary to the spirit of learning, number one, and number two, it is simply toxic for democratic citizenship.
Toxic's a great way to describe it. Dr. Robert George, professor at Princeton University, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thanks so much, Wyatt.